I'm going to sneak this in at the front of the episode here. I just finished recording all 3 of these stories, and I am truly speechless, dude. I do not understand how it starts off crazy and then progressively gets more and more insane as each story, kind of progresses. I hope you listen to the entire thing and let me know what you think in the comments when it's over. I'm reading every single one of them. There's not been a video on this channel like this one before, so I hope you like it. Let's do it. There's nothing I love more than Christmas family traditions. I remember when I was a little girl, my father would take me and my sisters to pick out our Christmas stockings during the first week of December, and I'd always pick a stocking with a different color and pattern for every Christmas. This was one of many Christmas family traditions that we had during my childhood, but out of all of them, my favorite Christmas tradition was something that my father called the Night of the Grinch. The Night of the Grinch was a Christmas family tradition for us that always happened on the 22nd of December every year. My father, who was a huge Dr. Seuss fan, and especially the Grinch book, would dress up as the Grinch and chase us around the house while trying to take our presents from under the tree. This tradition was really dear to my heart. Even though most people saw it as weird and potentially traumatizing to small kids, I thought it was all in good fun, and I loved it. I always wanted to carry on that tradition when I had a family of my own, and after giving it a lot of thought, I finally decided to do it this upcoming Christmas with my 11-year-old daughter, Bree, and my 9-year-old son, Chris. I remember being so excited to share this tradition that I loved as a child with my kids, but while I didn't know it at the time, the harmless Christmas family tradition that I enjoyed so much would nearly cost me my life and the lives of my kids. It all began on the 18th of December. I started setting out all of the preparations that morning as I thought about the best way to go about it. I initially wanted my husband to do it, the same way my father dressed up as the Grinch, but after talking to him about it, we decided not to, though, because he told me he wouldn't be able to keep it together, and he'd probably ruin the entire thing as soon as our kids figured it out. He then suggested asking a friend or someone from work, so I decided to call one of my friends and coworkers, this real sweet guy named Kevin. I called him that evening to give him an idea of what I wanted him to do. I then spoke about my plans in much more detail when we met up at work the next day, explaining how I wanted him to dress up as the Grinch, come to my house on the 22nd around dinner time, and chase my kids around the house while attempting to take their Christmas presents for a little while before finally making his exit. I also made it very clear that he should be gentle while chasing them around the house. I didn't want him to cross any lines with them, and I told him to give them extra space if things got too hectic. Kevin agreed to all of my terms, and when I told him that I would pay him for this service, he said no, and he said he'd happily do it for free. In the following days, I ironed out the final details of the plan with my husband and with my coworker, Kevin. Kevin had already gotten the suit, and he was all set to dress up as the Grinch and chase my kids around the house. I'd also prepared some cookies and ice cream that I planned to surprise them with afterward. My dad usually did the same thing for me and my sisters, and we would eat those cookies and that ice cream while we watched How the Grinch Stole Christmas. It was around 5:15 p.m. when I heard somebody banging violently on my front door. Alarmed, I went out there to check who it was, and when I opened the door, I saw Kevin, dressed up in his Grinch suit. Confused, I said, "Hey, you're here early, Kevin. I thought we agreed at 6 p.m. But instead of responding, Kevin barges into my house and rushes towards my kids. I could instantly tell that something was wrong, as he was really taking things too far and genuinely terrifying them. I remember telling him to be gentle, to allow them to run around, and to give them a lot of space, just like my father did during our tradition. But he was being extremely violent, and he made numerous attempts to grab them and toss them on the floor. He was also smashing all of the presents that he came into contact with, which was the total opposite of what I told him to do. I specifically said that he should bring a bag to gently place all of the presents in and then return them to my kids later on after it was all over. I couldn't understand why Kevin had chosen to ignore all of my instructions, but I was going to put a stop to it before anybody got hurt. I assumed Kevin might have probably drank a little too much before getting there, which explained why he had forgotten my instructions and was acting out. However, before I could say anything, I got a text message on my phone. I quickly checked to see that it was a text from Kevin, and it reads, "Hey Heather, I'm just in my car putting my suit on right now. I'll be there in about 45 minutes. I'm sorry I'm running late." My heart instantly drops to my stomach as the horrific realization dawned on me. I couldn't believe it. And the first thing that I instinctively did was to protect and shield my kids. I wrapped my arms around them and I tried to take them and run to the nearest room. However, I noticed a sinister grin on the Grinch's face, and I knew that the stranger inside that suit had just realized that I had figured it out. He starts to attack me without hesitation, but I managed to scream for my husband before our assailant wrapped his hands around my neck. My husband, doing something in our bedroom, instantly comes out of the room with this distraught look on his face, and I told him earlier that day that he should hide in our room when Kevin arrives and then come out a little while later to save our kids from the big bad Grinch that was chasing them, which is why he didn't come out to the living room earlier, despite all the noise. He'd come out of the room with his firearm due to my alarming scream, and I could see the confusion in his eyes as he raises his gun and he says, "Kevin, what the hell's wrong with you? Why are you strangling my wife? Get your hands off her now before I shoot." The insane man wearing the Grinch suit, who'd almost snapped my neck at this point, slowly took his large hands off of me and then bolts towards the front door after my husband fires a warning shot. My husband rushes to my side as I cough and gasp for air. He couldn't believe what he'd just witnessed, so he asked, "Did Kevin go crazy?" And I was still trying to get some air in as my eyes were bloodshot red. But I managed to look at my husband and I said, "That's not Kevin." The attack on our house spread throughout the entire neighborhood. The police were at my home in minutes and I explained everything. When the officers asked why we had planned this all out with Kevin, I told them that it was an old Christmas tradition, and then I explained how I never realized that it could go so wrong. Kevin, who had arrived at our house about 30 minutes later, was questioned by the authorities. After Kevin's questioning, an investigation was carried out, and at the end of it all, the detectives believed that this attack was most likely carried out by a coworker who overheard our plans when we discussed them at work. They also believed that it could have been carried out by someone Kevin had told the plan to, because during his questioning, Kevin had informed the officers that he had a few drinks the night before and had told a few of his friends that his coworker had hired him to dress up as the Grinch, enter their home, and playfully traumatize their children. He had also asked a few of them if they knew where to buy a good Grinch costume. Each and every one of our coworkers, in addition to the friends that Kevin told, were interrogated extensively, but despite all of their efforts, the authorities were never able to find the culprit. Our home was put under surveillance for a little while after the incident because the authorities didn't know how the man had gotten our address and they feared he may return. However, despite the authorities' precautions, the assailant never came back. The police who were surveilling our home eventually left, and they told us to call them immediately if we ever notice anything suspicious again. Things slowly went back to normal after the authorities left. Both my kids and I had to undergo intense therapy to get over the traumatic incident, but with time, we were all able to move on, and the children eventually forgot about that disturbing day as the years passed. I still think about that day though, especially this time of year, because it makes me realize that the world today is much different from the world that I grew up in. I couldn't understand how a coworker or one of Kevin's friends or whoever it was knew about or overheard our plans, and they would take the time out of their day to turn a Christmas family tradition into something so sinister and twisted. I never looked at anyone from work in the same way again, and I distanced myself from Kevin because I still had the suspicion that it really was one of his friends that he told our plans about. Ever since that day, the only Christmas tradition that I shared with my kids was to allow them to pick out their Christmas stockings, because I realized the hard way that some Christmas traditions should be left in the past. The story you just heard was written about a low-profile true crime case that happened in Ferndale, California. On the 22nd of December, a resident of Ferndale, one of the smaller cities in California, was attacked by an unidentified man wearing a Grinch costume. Several records show that wearing a Grinch costume and scaring kids around the holidays has become very commonplace across the US, as there are several videos of this activity online. Think about the clowns from 2016, except, evolved. While most people see this as a light-hearted act of messing around with their kids, others believe doing this can actually be pretty traumatic, and it can lead to something much more sinister, just like the disturbing true case in the story that you just listened to. Despite extensive investigations, the assailant was never found, and it's still believed that he's out there today doing the same thing. The worst day of my life happened on Christmas Eve. Despite all the time that's passed since this happened, I can still remember this horrific day as if it were yesterday. This particular day had started out in a very hectic manner. I was running all over our little town trying to find a very particular toy that my daughter Ellie wanted for Christmas. Basically, every mother who had a female child during this Christmas shopping period wanted to get their hands on this toy because they were extremely popular dolls that every little girl wanted for Christmas in 2009. They were called Live dolls, if I remember correctly, and they were sold out almost everywhere during Christmas time. Getting the particular doll that my daughter wanted was even harder, because it was a special version of the doll called Daniela's First Edition outfit. This doll was a limited edition released in small quantities, which is why I had to run all around town looking for it. They were extremely difficult to find once they'd been sold out. At the time, most of my friends told me that I didn't have to stress myself out looking for that particular doll, and that I should just buy any doll I could find and call it a day. But my little daughter Ellie had done so well on her tests that school year, and I promised her that if she aced her grades, Santa would bring that doll to her for Christmas. I knew it was a lot of work, but I didn't want to let her down with failed promises like my parents often did with me when I was growing up. I was a very determined mother, and I wanted to keep the promise that I'd made to my daughter by getting that gift for her. I was willing to do anything that I could to get my hands on it, but unfortunately, my search nearly led me down a very dark path, and it ultimately taught me a lesson about the dangers of last-minute Christmas shopping. It all began on the 24th of December, 2009. It was about 3:45 p.m., and I had just left the 8th mall that I'd visited that day. Even though I'd searched throughout the entire building, I still couldn't find the toy I was looking for. I knew I was running out of time at this point because the evening was now fast approaching. I also knew that even if I somehow managed to get my hands on the doll, I had to wrap it up and place it under the tree before the next morning. I'd pretty much exhausted every mall in my area, in addition to all of the online stores that also didn't have the doll. So, with no other options left, I got in my car and I made my way down to the last place that I can think of, which was a local strip mall that I often frequented. This particular mall was close to home, and I usually did all of my shopping there. As I entered the mall, I greeted the sweet security guard. He's this man named Jack, whom I'd gotten to know from all the times that I've shopped there before. I quickly made my way to the toy dolls section and I searched every inch of the place. But no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't find the doll anywhere. My frustrations were reaching an all-time high now, as I'd been searching all day. But right before I could leave to look for another store in town that I might have missed or forgotten, I saw a strange man staring at me out of the corner of my eye. Confused, I asked, "Excuse me, sir, is there a problem?" And then the man walked up to me with this odd grin on his face and he said, "No, there's no problem. I just couldn't help but notice that you're frantically looking for something, and I thought maybe I could be of help." I couldn't tell if the strange man had worked at the mall or not, but I told myself that, hey, at this point, I didn't have anything to lose. So I told him about the limited edition Daniela Live doll that I'd been looking for and how I really needed to get it as a Christmas present for my daughter. The man then looked me in the eyes and said, "Well, you're in luck, miss. I actually own a small convenience store just at the edge of town. I usually come to this place to stock up on several things for my shop, and I'm pretty sure I picked up some of those dolls last time I was here. If you just follow me to the parking lot, I can show you the ones I have in my truck to see if I actually did grab the one you're looking for, and I'll give it to you for the right price." I remember being so excited that my search might finally come to an end, but I was also cautious. I wasn't sure if the man was lying or trying to sell me some off-brand doll, but I knew I didn't really have a choice. I thought about the smile on my daughter's face the next morning when she opened her presents, and I just wanted to see her happy so badly, so I agreed to follow this man to his truck. On our way out of the store, the security guard, Jack, who I mentioned earlier, asked me if I found what I was looking for, and I told him that I couldn't find anything in the store, but the man that I was following told me that he might have it in his truck. Jack then stared at the man with a suspicious look in his eyes, and he tells me, "I would have gladly asked the guys working in storage to see if we have any of these dolls left for you, because sometimes they're hidden away on shelves in the back, but anyway, please stay safe, Miss Green." I thanked him for worrying about me, and I told him that I would take him up on his offer if this man didn't have the doll I was looking for in his truck. After I followed the man, who told me his name was Daniel, to the edge of the parking lot, I wondered why he parked all the way out there, and I asked him. Daniel then tells me that it just makes it easier for him to leave when he wanted to. Before adding that, he was going to bring the truck around and show me the dolls that he had in stock. I told him I'd wait for him, and I watched as he made his way to his truck. However, right when he disappeared from view, two hands came out of nowhere and wrapped a cloth over my face. I tried to fight it, but within seconds, the world around me went dark. I don't know how long I was out for, but I woke up in what looked like the back of a van. My hands and feet were tied up, and I felt extremely lightheaded. I saw Daniel looming over me and started to scream. but it was of no use because my mouth was gagged. With this sick smile on his face, Daniel looks at me right in the eyes and he says, "Would you like to know an interesting fact, Ms. Green? The best time to get merchandise for a human trafficker like myself is during the holiday period. Many women, particularly desperate single mothers like you, are always looking for something that they'd forgotten to buy for their kids during last-minute Christmas shopping. And it's so easy to lure them into your trap by promising that you can provide whatever they're looking for." The horror that I felt in that moment was something I'd never experienced before, as it finally dawned on me. Daniel then goes on to explain how he was part of a trafficking ring and how he was going to sell me and many other women that he'd managed to kidnap during this period to the highest bidder. I can still recall the cold look in his eyes as he said, "I'm sure you can understand me, Miss Green. I'm only doing this for the money. I need to buy good presents for my kids too. I really hope that you're sold to one of the better clients that'll use you rather than the ones that might, well, sell you for parts." Tears slowly start to run down my cheeks as the thought of never seeing my daughter's eyes or her smile again completely broke me. I'd been doing this all for her, but I told myself that there was no point in that now, as I'd ended up in a ghastly situation that I could not get a way out of. I knew there was no other option for me but just to accept my fate. But before I could break down even more, I heard something. I thought that I'd made it up at first, but I was starting to hear it more clearly now, and it was the sound of sirens. Daniel, who now had a terrified look on his face, grabbed me by the hair and screamed, "How the hell did you do this? How did you call the cops without your phone?" He raises his hand to hit me, but before he could, the van stopped and he was surrounded. Daniel's driver was quickly taken away, and then Daniel was told to come out with his arms in the air. And with no other options possible, he did what he was told. Thank goodness. I remember thanking each and every one of those officers that saved my life, but I was confused as to how they knew where to find me. One of the officers then told me that they'd received a phone call from the local mall security guard. Jack had told the cops that he'd seen the suspicious man lurking around the area before, which is why he'd followed me, because he wanted to make sure I was okay. He also gave the officers the vehicle's plate number and then followed the van just so he wouldn't lose sight of me. The words of gratitude that I had for Jack were never enough, and they never will be. And I remember giving him the biggest hug ever when I finally saw him at the crime scene shortly after. When I was finally allowed to go home, I held my daughter in my arms and I cried because I was so grateful that I got to see her beautiful eyes and her smile again. Early the next morning, around 5 a.m. before my daughter had woken up for Christmas, I get a phone call from Jack. I asked him why he was calling this early, and I assumed it had something to do with the police investigation or a detective needing to get a hold of me. But he told me that it wasn't about that. Jack then said that he knew how hard I'd been looking for this particular doll to give it to my daughter. So he asked some of his friends who are working in storage, and they managed to find the very last one tucked away in some boxes in the back. I started to cry as I thanked him again from the bottom of my heart. Jack then brought the doll over, and we were able to wrap it up and put it under the tree before my daughter woke up. I cried again as I watched my daughter smile as she opened her gift, and I even asked Jack to stay for Christmas dinner. It was the least I could do to thank him for everything he'd done. Over 15 years have passed now since that horrific Christmas Eve, and I truly cherish every single day that I get to spend with my daughter after I was rescued. Despite the traumatic memories of that day, I still look fondly back on that particular Christmas because I know how lucky I was to have survived. I've also remained in touch with Jack, the mall security guard who saved my life, and I thank him every year by getting him a Christmas gift and inviting him over for Christmas dinner. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if Jack hadn't been cautious and hadn't followed me that day. I know it may sound silly to some, but I truly believe it was a Christmas miracle. Several statistics show that there's a disturbing uptick in kidnappings in addition to many other crimes during the Christmas season and most holiday periods. Specialists in this field believe this alarming rise happens because of severe financial pressures, in addition to the increased opportunities for kidnappers and criminals alike to kidnap and take people due to more crowded spaces at shopping malls or airports during the festive periods. The story you just heard was written based on a true crime case and submitted by an anonymous woman. We only know her as Miss Green. And this unidentified woman is believed to be one of the lucky ones because despite the authorities' endless efforts, dozens or probably hundreds of people are still being taken and kidnapped during the holidays. And unfortunately, most of them are never found. My name is Sandra Rivera, and I can't stand the thought of Christmas anymore. It wasn't always like this, though. Christmas used to mean something else entirely, but everything changed after the Christmas party on December 27 of 2019. Since that night, Christmas isn't about joy or celebration for me. Now, the holiday brings nothing but fear, anxiety, and this sense of dread that I doubt will ever go away. 2019 was a rough one for our little town of Culpeper, Virginia. It all started on July 6th when a 14-year-old boy named Joel went missing. Back then, it felt like a huge deal to most people, but nobody could have predicted what happened in the coming months after his disappearance. One kid after another vanished, and by the time December rolled around, 17 kids and teens were gone without a trace. The police had no answers, no leads, nothing. And naturally, as a result, the whole town was weighed down by this heavy and this hopeless feeling. As a teacher at the high school, I could feel the fear from the kids and the anxiety from their parents, so in a bid to raise everyone's spirits for the holidays, our principal, Mr. Matthews, decided that he would throw a Christmas party for all of the students. It required each student to pick a secret Santa for a gift exchange. The aim for this was really just a decent distraction, and honestly, it seemed like a good idea. While planning the party, the principal and the staff could sense the general vibe of the students getting better. So, Mr. Matthews decided that the staff would also be having a similar party as a type of thank you for all the work that we'd been doing. I had absolutely no idea who I had as my secret Santa, but I had gotten the janitor. His name was Conway. Even though we had worked together for years at the time, he had a very strange vibe and mostly kept to himself, so I barely knew anything about him. But still, I knew I had to get him a gift, and the only person who would have had any insight into what he might want was our guidance counselor, Ian. Unlike Mr. Conway, Ian and I had kept a pretty good working relationship over the years. I visited him a couple of times when I first got the job as a teacher, but we really bonded during a rough patch in my life when I had serious problems with my eyesight that made it really difficult for me to continue teaching. Even after a few surgeries, I still had real issues, and Ian had gone through something similar, so his support really helped me through it. Naturally, he became a friend. When I asked about the gift, I didn't get much detail from Ian about Conway as a person. All he did was smile and say, "Conway's a tough guy to get a present for. He doesn't like anything in particular, but if it helps, maybe get him a hammer. I think he'd really appreciate that." I didn't think too much about what Ian said. I just bought a hammer, wrapped it up, and I tossed it into the pile of presents with Conway's name on it. The night of the party came soon after that, and as the hours went by, people started picking up their gifts from the pile, and one by one, their secret Santas revealed themselves. Later that night, I noticed Conway making his way toward the presents, and when he unwrapped the hammer, I figured I'd go wish him a Merry Christmas, but when I did, something felt off. He didn't say a single word to me, but instead this weird, huge grin formed on his face before he eventually nodded and walked out of the gym in a hurry. Out of curiosity, I decided to follow him, and I watched from a window as he walked across the schoolyard and into the shed where tools and equipment were stored. After waiting for a bit, trying to figure out what he was up to, I just decided to leave. As soon as I turned around, though, I nearly jumped out of my skin because I was met immediately with the sight of Ian standing extremely close to me. Startled, I stepped back a bit and I looked at him in confusion as he laughed and said, "My apologies, Sandra. I didn't mean to scare you. It's just, I'm your secret Santa, and I would like to give you your gift in person. I think you'll really like it." For a moment, Ian's sudden appearance took my mind off of Mr. Conway, and as I followed him through the dark and empty hallway, the music from the gym slowly faded out until all I could hear were the echoes of our footsteps. Ian was around 6'2" and had this commanding presence that just made people feel safe around him. He was dressed in a suit that night and had on his usual big tinted glasses that made it difficult for anyone to see his eyes. Soon enough, we reached his office, and once he unlocked the door, he turned on a dim lamp in the corner and offered me a seat. He began rummaging through one of his drawers for what I assumed was my present, and after a few seconds of searching, he goes, "Ah, there it is," before pulling out a small, worn-out brown box. He puts it on the table, and then he slid it towards me slowly, with a smile that barely contained his excitement. The lamp's dim lighting reflected against his glasses, and it gave him this airy look as he calmly says to me, "Go on, check it out." I was hesitant at first, but his excitement was almost funny. So I reached for the box and I slowly opened it. All amusement vanished immediately after I saw what was in the box, and I started grasping onto my stomach and I dropped to the floor, horrified. Sitting in the box were a pair of partly rotten human eyeballs. Dark veins were webbed across their surface in disgusting and grotesque patterns. The details of the decayed muscle and the unnaturally lifeless stare burned into my memory instantly. I don't know whether it was the utter shock and disgust that didn't allow me to scream in the moment, but I just couldn't make a sound at all. All I could do was sit there in silence, completely frozen with fear and confusion, staring at the box as Ian stared back at me. I get back up and he says, "So?" Very casually, mind you. "Do you like them?" Personally, I thought they were a very fine pair, but after trying them out, I realized they didn't quite fit. And then I thought, why not give them to Sandy, huh? He smiled, almost like he was expecting a thank you for handing me the world's best Christmas present. Now, my mind was in a million places at once, but I knew that my best option was just to act natural until I could figure out what really I should be doing. You said you tried these out already?" I asked, My voice was breaking now, and he looked confused by my question for a second, but he responded by snapping his fingers and saying, "Oh, that's right, you don't know." He pauses to take off his glasses and bring out a small pocket knife from his pocket. I tensed up a little bit just at the sight of the knife, but after relaxing, I was immediately alarmed again as Ian inserted the blade into his left eye socket and, with horrifying ease, popped out his eye onto the table. At this point, I couldn't hide my fear anymore, so I stood up quickly and I backed up against the wall. And it was then, in that moment, that I realized the eye on the table was actually a glass eye, and that Ian didn't have a left eye at all. He turned to me slowly and revealed an empty eye socket. It was dark red in there, and I don't even want to describe how wet it looked and how it looked like it was moving still. He says, "Remember when I told you about the problems with my eyes?" He's still super casual at this point, almost like we're talking about the weather. He goes on, "Well, I actually lost this one not too long ago to cancer. But it's fine, really, because I've been collecting a few since the year started. Just looking and waiting for the perfect Christmas gift to fix it. To fix us, Sandy. Luckily for you, these didn't fit me, so they're all yours. Merry Christmas." And that's when everything clicked. For me. And the horrific realization dawned on me. Ian had probably taken those eyes out of one of his victims and forced them into his socket. When it didn't work, he took them out. It probably caused an infection in his eye, leading to what I saw in there. I don't know. I don't want to get too graphic, but there were bugs. Nothing more needed to be said in that moment. All that was left to do was run out of the office and head back to the gym in the hopes that I could make it there before Ian stopped me. In a matter of seconds, I was out the door and bolting toward the gym while screaming for someone to call the police. To my surprise, Ian wasn't chasing me. And by the time I got to the gym, a couple of my colleagues had already called the cops, and they immediately rushed up to me, concerned. Once I finally caught my breath and I told them what happened, the principal and a couple of other guys went to the office to make sure Ian was around until the cops got there. But when they got to his office, Ian was gone, and so were the eyes. The police arrived a few minutes later and immediately began asking questions. Once they heard what I had to say, they quickly split into two groups. The first group went into the shed to investigate Mr. Conway, while the others left immediately to search Ian's house. It suddenly felt like the nightmare was finally coming to an end, but as the night unfolded, it became clear that was not going to happen. Mr. Conway turned out to be completely clean, and despite what we had all suspected, the shed contained nothing but tools and supplies. He had nothing to do with Ian or the missing kids. Ian's home, however, not so much. And the search there revealed horrifying evidence, like diaries, tools, and blood-stained clothes. Ian, however, was nowhere to be found. Months later, the remains of some of the children were discovered in nearby woods. Along with them were scattered notes that Ian had kept during his madness. The notes detailed his horrific experimentation and revealed that he initially tried removing, well, I don't want to read this next sentence, but you're smart. You can guess what he was doing. Ian blamed the failure on the method of the eyeball removal and ended up stealing Mr. Conway's hammer as well as some other tools in order to try a different extraction method. Let's just go with that. The horrific story sent shockwaves through the entire town, and all celebrations for Christmas and New Year's were canceled. Since the night of that Christmas party, I've dreaded the thought of Christmas completely. The image of those eyes just sitting on his desk in that mahogany box staring up at me is something that's haunted me for years and will continue to haunt and torment my dreams. If you ask me though, what terrifies me the most isn't just, the memory of that night. What it really is, if I think on it, is the questions that linger. Ian genuinely did not believe he had done anything wrong. In his head, all he was doing was searching for the perfect Christmas present. I wonder, did he continue to search for this present? Is he upset that I didn't accept his present? Will he be back for me and my family? These questions have been on my mind for years, and it's the uncertainty of it all that keeps me awake every Christmas. The story you just heard was inspired by the very real and true events that occurred in Culpeper, Virginia from 2017 to 2013. During that time, at least 35 kids went missing in that small town. The strange disappearance of children continue to this day. While some have returned home, the majority of them are still unaccounted for. And the question remains, where are these children going? Who is taking them? And probably most disturbingly, what do they want from them? Hey, thank you so much for listening to this episode. I'm very glad that you're here with me right now. I know this episode was different than what you might normally be used to, but little heads up, I do plan on, inserting scary story content into the rotation as well. The glitches aren't going away. Don't worry. I know that's everybody's favorite thing. But I have heard from a lot of people that they are ready for different kinds of stories, from me at least. So I'm going to say yes to that and do things like this, themed episodes, scary episodes, just, see how much fun I can have switching it up just a little bit every now and then. Okay, I thank you. You're the best. Maybe watch another one if you're still awake.